And Professor Olga Boychuk is with the Centre for International Security Studies at the University of Sydney, and she joins us now from Sydney. Professor Olga Boychuk, welcome. So before we get to the latest developments, Vladimir Putin talked overnight about Ukraine being ancient Russian lands. What do you make of his view of history?
This is the weaponization of history at its best. So Russia, at this point, we're seeing Russia is not only engaged in geopolitics, right? Russia is not only engaged in reconstituting the map of Europe as we know it, as it has been since World War II. Russia is also engaged in ontopolitics, and that's in a way, it is also more concerning because ontopolitics has to do with reconstitution of the structures of meaning and of the categories that make up our social reality. And so what Russia is trying to...
Sorry, and what does that indicate about Russia's intentions?
So what Russia is trying to do is to deny Ukrainians nationhood and by extension to deny Ukraine's claims to sovereignty. And that is that's what has been done. So we all witnessed Ukraine being attacked from the television, from that speech. And so this night is one of the most significant, last night was one of the most significant developments in the modern European history.
Yeah, so how would you characterise this move overnight to recognise Luhansk and Donetsk and send, he said he's sending what he describes as peacekeeping troops in. I don't think we've seen any evidence of that just yet, but yeah, what's the significance of this moment?
It is really significant because that pretty much identifies Russia as a terrorist state. So the definition of terrorism is the unlawful use of force and violence against persons and property to either intimidate or coerce a government or the civilian population in furtherance of political or social objectives. So we're seeing that, and this brings a new development in what we understand about terrorism, because we like to think that terrorists are non-state actors. In this instance, we're dealing with a legitimate state that has its legitimate representatives, diplomatic representatives, that has a seat at the UN Security Council. So the forthcoming emergency meeting of the UN Security Council is, in a way, it's jeopardized because Russia has the veto power there. So these are the developments that we need to pay very close attention to because this is unprecedented.
What was this effectively already Russian territory because these Russian-backed troops were basically had control of these regions anyway?
It was a Russian orchestrated insurgency, and it was common knowledge that Russian troops were there, just like right now is common knowledge that Russia is shelling in many instances, many civilian cities and towns and villages and hitting the critical infrastructure objects. However, right now, Russia being there officially effectively means that Russia has annexed these territories just like they annexed Crimea. So this is a very disturbing pattern. Mm-hmm.
So what should Ukraine and the West do now if they want to stop Russian troops from going any further?
It is really hard to tell because judging from Vladimir Putin's speech, it was very threatening. And I have a few quotes from the speech. He said those who organize any provocations that threaten Russia's fundamental security interests will regret about their actions like they have not regretted about anything for a long time. So that is a distinct threat. And also he said that I hope no one will think of crossing the red line regarding Russia, and where it will be outlined, we will determine ourselves in each particular case. So that pretty much sets an ultimatum to the Western leaders, to Western democracies, that Putin is essentially the one who gets to decide the reality on the ground. And that is, of course, very concerning.
And so how do you believe the West should effectively handle this now?
So at this point, I know that the U.S. have announced sanctions for doing business with the occupied territories, but I think this is not sufficient. And I think we need to speak more critically about the Russian state and the role that Russia plays in geopolitics, in the contemporary geopolitics. And so, of course, it is likely that there will be much heavier and stricter sanctions needed in that case. But I think it is a broader question. What is this a precedent of? So we saw the late 90s, the bombing of Chechnya. We saw what happened in Syria. We saw the occupation of Georgia. We saw the annexation of Crimea. So right now we're in a pivotal historical moment where we get to decide, right, does this serve to be a precedent for something else? or do we stop here?
And how does the West ensure that it stops here?
Absolutely. And so this is a matter of, this is really a trying time for the whole system of international law, international relations. And of course, we're all going to be watching the further developments.
Do you think it's inevitable that Putin will try to move on Kiev?
It is really difficult to predict. Right now, these developments are not looking, and I don't have any reason for optimism seeing what's been happening. So I think there is a risk of that. It is really hard to tell what is going to happen in the next 2 days.
Yeah, and so you've mentioned the sanctions there. What else can be done at the moment? But what should the West be doing militarily right now to try to rein in Vladimir Putin?
Well, given the threats that have been announced by Vladimir Putin, given the references to Russia's nuclear arsenal, I really think that the West will also need to act carefully because these threats have been already voiced, right? They've been made public. And so it is really hard to tell. There are talks about stricter personal sanctions on the Russian oligarchs and their families, perhaps in hopes that if they're able to pressure the Russian oligarchy back into Russia or exile them from the countries, from the European or Western countries in which they're residing, freeze their assets, maybe that will further decrease Vladimir Putin's popularity in Russia, and maybe that will undermine his support by the other oligarchs. So that is one option that, of course, could be implemented, but the events that we're seeing right now, they're really indicative that it is time for stricter sanctions, and there have been guarantees to react swiftly to escalations. I think this is the point of no return. This is the point where some action has to be taken.
Olga Boychuk, what can you tell us about the people of Ukraine? Are you in touch with people in Ukraine right now, and how they're feeling and what they feel about the prospect of the possibility of the Russians moving in?
It is, so the people of Ukraine have lived through this war for the past 8 years, and in a way they're really fatigued, but they're also resilient and they're prepared. There are a lot of civil defense protocols that are being enacted, so people know where their nearest emergency shelter is. They also know what to do in case of an attack. A lot of families have emergency backpacks and suitcases packed and ready to leave if there was, for example, heavy bombing in their area. So people are definitely ready. They're ready to resist this occupation. But also there is a sense of disbelief, I guess, and watching this speech, this historical speech that happened last night. It was just, it's just an alternative version of reality that unfortunately might become reality. So this is very concerning for that reason as well.
Okay, Olga Boychuk, thanks so much for talking to us this morning.
Thank you, Joe.